back here, and then I think you had a question too, so right behind you.
Well, I got just one big picture question, and then I think two little ones.
Okay.
But just in terms of the perspective of harm, in terms of just cost, benefit, risk assessment, that kind of thing, are there any particular studies that you could point to or research that has been done to kind of quantify either in dollar values or impacts on wildlife or that kind of thing?
Yeah.
The direct harm to Puget Sound as a wide ecosystem, or are we talking more in terms of indirect indicators, that kind of thing within the broader scheme?
Yeah.
Can you put a dollar on it?
Yeah, it's difficult to put a dollar on it, and I'll explain why. You have vessels that come in and out from different countries, they're in different locations, you have different sources of pollution getting into the water body, you have different numbers of people on vessels, you have liveaboards. All these different elements make it very difficult to quantify like exact loadings or how many pounds of solids are discharged. We have some estimates in mind, we have some rough numbers on that to understand the quantity involved. But we've been more focused on the risk factor and we know what comes out of sewage, so the studies that we refer to are, the quality of effluent from the discharges. So that's what's looked at when it comes to the risk factor involved.
There are a couple of cassette studies.
Oh yeah,
thank
you.
There's also, there have been some, isolated bays, like Mystery Bay is an example of where that was more moorings and that was directly attributable to these almost a liveaboard situation in that case.
Yeah.
But this is as already mentioned, for those that don't have MSDs MSDs, for most of Puget Sound, theoretically this is already what people are supposed to be holding already. So how do you know? I mean, trying to determine who's actually violating that right now is just. People always want, like around stormwater, we consider that the #1 threat to Puget Sound. We've attempted to, like on the toxic side, attempted to get a general range of estimates around that, and it's just, it is insanely complicated. Doesn't mean that, we can't kind of isolate areas, and, we'll continue to do monitoring, and models will get better, but this is almost more impossible because you're talking about the boating habits of 150,000 people. I mean, how many of those people are actually discharging or not discharging? When, where, it's really tough.
And then you had something additional to it?
Well, I was just saying, I have one quick follow-up to that, and then just a total side question. And so, is there a method in place, or is there even a conceivable method by which you could evaluate the effectiveness of the program after the fact in terms of a long-term monitoring? I mean, could you turn around 10 years from now and say, these were the results?
Yeah, what we can point to, and again, it's the same issue with monitoring, is you have other things being fixed at the same time. And so when you're trying to quantify while you have fixes going on with septic and CSOs and other elements, trying to quantify what was the solution gets complex. But what we can look at long term is the amount of sewage going to the pump out stations. We can do surveys to really evaluate how it's working with boaters and where the equipment need to be, what their problems are with what's going on or whatever. So those surveys can really help with the long term. And we can look at certain localized water bodies where it might not be quite as complex to see some of those differences. But that's what other states have really been able to do as well when it comes to long term.
Okay, then my real quick question.
Your side question, yes.
Yeah, in terms of pump out stations,
yeah.
Who pays for the construction of a pump out station or the operation costs? Is it a public service or a for-profit operation?
It really depends. There are some that are private out there that are just done on their own by certain marinas or groups. The vast majority of those 100 stationary pump outs we cite are all under the grant program. So the money does come from somewhere. It comes from the fishing licenses and such that eventually come from the federal government to pay for those pump outs. The operation and maintenance is also a certain percentage of that covered by that grant program as well. So it's been a very successful program around the country and very successful here. The commercial pump outs are a little different because a lot of those can't really be done on that grant program with the conditions of that grant program. what we're looking to do is to try to use as much of the grant funding that we've been working under already to try to add at least 2 or 3 of those stationary pump outs in some of those key locations for commercial vessels. So we're trying to pay for as much of that under this grant program, but it's possible ports could be involved, and down the road ports and such could be involved in paying for that, or marinas.
So is that grant funding indefinite?
It's not indefinite, so we're
Okay,
trying to use as
so-
much of that right now as we can while it's available.
So in the
Of course, that's
foreseeable-
prioritized by lots of
Sure.
other people in EPA, but we are trying to steer some of that towards some of the pump outs that we think are needed.
Okay, but after a certain period of time, there will be a greater cost
Right.
involved, and
There could be, but again, there's already quite a few options out there for the pump outs, even for the commercial, so we're not seeing that a whole bunch more, you wouldn't need to be adding one at every port. Again, most of those vessels, commercial vessels, are discharging out at sea already, so it's those tugs and those small cruise ships and such that we're trying to, in commercial fishing, that we're trying to make sure have access to those. So I don't see that we would need to be adding like 50 over the next 5 years. We're looking at just a handful that should be able to handle the capacity that we're seeing. And then, I'm sorry, right here.
Yeah, coming back to the San Juan Islands,
Yeah,
uh,
one of my favorite places.
yeah, ours too, and many of the people in this room, I bet. But there's not very many stations out there. It looks to be quite underserved. What are the plans for that?
There are
State
a
doesn't
few
have
out
any
there. Yeah, there's a couple things going on there. There's an additional stationary one that's in the process right now. So there's one additional stationary, but also State Parks has been very creative in trying to create and get funding for some barges that would have pump outs available on them, and they're talking about multiple ones of those, possibly 5 or 6 of those in areas around the San Juans to increase
Now, I'm
that.
thinking of Susha Island, Fossil Bay,
Yeah.
I mean, they could
And
use
those are
it.
exactly in our outreach so far. That's exactly what we've heard, and that's why that is happening right now with state parks and with the stationary. Also, mobile pump outs. There's a new one that's going to be servicing that area. But that's the plan, anyways.
Where is that,
Private
near
company.
Mobile?
There's a new mobile pump out that plans on servicing that area as well.
Where is it though?
I don't know exactly where it's going to be stationed, but the idea was that the San Juans overall would be, they could move
Mobile
around.
means it's,
Mobile means it's on a boat, it has a pump out, so it goes and it can go right up to vessels or different
Oh,
areas,
okay.
pump out, and then it brings that waste back onshore to a land
it's
system.
not like the one at Reed Harbor where it sits on a barge and you come, or a dock and
There
you
are
come
some
up.
of those, and yeah, that's different ways that they're done. There's a lot of different options out there. The mobile boats are
Right, they travel
very
around,
flexible.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the specific locales that you think that are underserved, I mean, those are excellent examples of, we wanna hear that. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds
And
like-
again, we have been working
I'm sure
on
you
that
have
one particularly,
already.
but if there are other ideas, we're always,
Yeah.
open to hearing that and trying to work with that grant program through state
It's too
parks.
bad, the state park doesn't have any money, so whatever, I mean,
It's, yeah,
There's
so
a real
they're
opportunity
trying
there if they
to
had
work
the money to
different
do it.
grants and nonprofits in different ways to make that happen, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have to channel my friend Elizabeth here, who I don't know why she's here, but every time we talk about this, she says, Homeland Security is going to be boarding your boats. And so I need you to address this for
Well,
Elizabeth.
Homeland Security is U.S. Coast Guard, and U.S. Coast Guard already boards boats, and that's under their jurisdiction already, and this isn't gonna change what they do as far as that's concerned. They board for multiple reasons, whether it's safety or, different
just because.
oil spills or whatever it might be. They have their authorities that are existing. We wouldn't be saying, Homeland Security, board some more and try to do, this. They have their priorities and they have their work that they do that's
So it wouldn't be more, and it wouldn't be different people from Homeland Security. It would be the same Coast Guard as has always been
exactly.
boarding.
just one more thing on the checklist.
I was just curious whether there has been, because I know Coast Guards, I know some people have actually had Coast Guard come on and check their,
Yeah, they already have that authority.
they have that authority now.
Yeah, they
Would
check the
this
flag
be perhaps a an incentive for them to do less because they know that the state is picking up some of that?
You know that my discussions with them so far, they haven't really indicated that, what they've done with other states. It
There
seems
could be
like
some
it's
public
stayed
comment to
pretty
that effect,
consistent,
though.
but yeah, feel free to comment on that, we can bring that to Coast Guard and ask them.
Okay.
There was another question somewhere in here. Oh. You have one? No?